The mystery of Birdie Dewey was a story that I never looked for. It really started out as a search for an old hotel. The legend had been, and the common belief about Boynton Beach, is the city I've lived in for over 20 years, was that it was founded by Major Nathan S. Boynton. But no one was quite sure exactly where the hotel was. So I went to the Palm Beach County Courthouse and looked into the tract books, which kind of detail all the land sales. Well, I did find Major Boynton's hotel, but I found something else that was very puzzling. The person who was selling all the lots in downtown Boynton and who had platted the town wasn't Major Boynton, it was someone else. And the name that was recorded on all the deeds was somebody named Birdie S. Dewey. I found that very confusing because I thought, I have never heard this name Dewey associated with Boynton. So I asked a colleague of mine, Janet DeVries, who at that time was working at the Boynton Beach City Library, as if she had ever heard of Birdie Dewey. And she said yes, that her and her husband were very important to the founding of Boynton Beach, and that Birdie Dewey was an author, and that she had written children's books. And I became very intrigued by that, and I thought, well, wait a minute now, a woman owns all the land in Boynton Beach area, and she's an author? So that's really what started us, both Janet and I, on a quest to find out more about Mrs. Dewey and their incredible life story in Palm Beach County.
Researching for the book Pioneering Palm Beach with Ginger Peterson became addicting. We fed off of each other's positive energy, and what would happen was, late at night we'd be texting each other, and we'd each be researching separately, and we would write to each other and we would say, look what I found. And at one point we had so much information that we said, we really should share this information with other people. They should know this story.
Mrs. Dewey was the grandniece of President Zachary Taylor, and her husband was the cousin of Admiral George Dewey, the hero of Manila. So their connections to American history were great. Mrs. Dewey's father was Jonathan Edward Spillman, who wrote the very famous song Flow Gently, Sweet Afton, which was one of the most popular songs of the 19th century. Found that the Deweys had arrived in Florida in 1881 and had first tried to pioneer in Central Florida by raising an orange grove in the mid-1880s, which proved to be unsuccessful. They went to Jacksonville, where they had lost the only child born to them, who died as an infant. And it was at that time they decided to embark on a new adventure to this mythical place, magical place that they had heard of called South Florida, and specifically the Lake Worth country.
If I had my way, I'd always stay in Florida among the palms. My one favorite haunt is a palm tree, and all I want is someone just to rest in my arms.
South Florida was actually the last frontier of America that had not been settled in any way. There was maybe 200 people living in all of what is today Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. It was considered to be almost uninhabitable because of the mosquitoes and the humidity and the extreme heat of summer. But people who came here had seen the tropical beauty of the coconut palm and other things will only grow in South Florida, and fell in love, especially with the Lake Worth area. There was no train or road here. To get here, it took the Deweys 1 week to get from Jacksonville down to the Palm Beaches area. They took schooners down the Indian River. They built a small cottage in the woods in what today would be the Northwoods section of West Palm Beach. Mr. Dewey went across to the island of Palm Beach, where he worked each day as an accountant or doing carpentry work. Well, Mrs. Dewey was alone in that cottage. She had encounters with Seminole Indians that were a little bit frightening for her at first. She had to do some of her own hunting, such as quail and squirrel, because it was very difficult to obtain food. One of the neatest parts of our research was trying to put a compilation together of all her known writings.
Mrs. Dewey published for various magazines of the day, including the Christian Union, Good Housekeeping, and Ladies' Home Journal.
The one that was most exciting, especially for us and for historians, was an obscure novel that she had published in a serialized form in a journal called the Florida Review. It was a 1909 publication, which was 8 chapters in which she wrote about her pioneering days in Palm Beach County.
It was a new Florida we had discovered. True, there were already a few families living there, but we felt ourselves to be, nonetheless, real discoverers. This was partly because much that we found existed only for and to us. The elect will understand this. To others, it will seem only a riddle to which there is no answer. All the country was practically an island, because its only highway was the water. An isle of charm, mosquitoes, sandflies, redbugs, makeshifts, and charm. The charm predominated. It was first and last, but all the other things were just as real.
Mrs. Dewey worked for the Tropical Sun, the first newspaper in Palm Beach County. She wrote a column under the name of Aunt Judith.
Her 1899 book, Bruno, which was the first work of hers that I found, was a bestseller nationwide, published by Little and Brown out of Boston. And it's the story of their dog and their early days in Florida. It sold over 100,000 copies its first year out.
The second book that Mrs. Dewey published was called The Blessed Isle, and The Blessed Isle was mostly about her cats.
You can see her love of animals and the central role that they played in her life.
In 1892, the Deweys moved from the western area to a home that they had built along the shores of Lake Worth. The home was a beautiful 2-story Victorian-style house with an octagon tower. They named their house Ben Trovato, which in Italian means well invented. While they were at the house, the Deweys did a bit of entertaining. One photo that we found showed a picnic that they had for the new visiting minister in town, and in the photo you will see many of the famous Palm Beach people, including the Cluettes, the Vanderbilts.
For the story in Boynton, Mrs. Dewey had bought the land herself in 1892 that makes up the old core of Boynton, the old downtown original platted area, for $700. In 1895, William Linton, who was one of the founders of Delray Beach, offered her $6,000 for her land in what would become the Boynton area. He didn't have all the money, so they had a contract for purchase where he would pay her $1,500 over 4 years. At some point, he became insolvent and couldn't pay her, so her and her husband filed a foreclosure suit. He had sold some lots, and also his partner in the deal, Major Nathan S. Boynton, had also sold lots through his Southern Land Company. So you had people who were given deeds by Linton that were basically worthless because Linton did not own the land. The court case was settled out of court. It did not go to trial, and Boynton, who held much of the money, they had collected $50 each for lots, handed that money over to the Deweys, and the Deweys retained all of their lands, and they then filed the plat for the town of Boynton in 1898. And their names are recorded on the plat because they were indeed the owners of the property. So then the Deweys were able to issue deeds to the people who had bought lots and put up houses on what became the town of Boynton.
It's really interesting to think of all that Mrs. Dewey must have seen in her lifetime. You know, arriving here in the 1880s and seeing all of the transitions. She was here before the railroad. One point when she describes coming to Palm Beach, she said, "We moved to a land fanned by mysterious spice-laden breezes." And then when the Royal Poinciana Hotel was built across the waterway, she described it as the lights twinkling like fairyland. They did witness it grow from a very small, rural, last frontier area into basically the land of the rich and famous. Pioneering Palm Beach is available at most local libraries. It's available on Amazon.com. It's available at the Barnes & Noble stores and at many of the small bookstores in Palm Beach County.